Hi, my name is Jordan. I work at the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters in Peterborough, Ontario at their Hunting and Fishing Heritage Centre. So I have a few videos for the wildlife portion of the Envirothon talking about habitats and food webs using Dichotomous Key and how to identify wildlife sign in your area. So I'm just going to start off by talking about what wildlife is. So any animal that lives in the wild is considered wildlife. So from insects to birds, mammals, fish, reptiles, amphibians, all of those are wildlife. Any animal that lives in nature is considered wildlife. So from mammals to fish to birds, even down to tiny little insects, they are all considered wildlife. So all wildlife is adapted to the specific habitats that they live in. So I'm actually showing you around the Heritage Center where I work, where we have several wildlife dioramas showing different habitat types. So right here we have Southern Ontario temperate deciduous habitat type. So these are all the animals that would live in the Peterborough area where our center is located. As we go through our exhibits a little more, we get more into Canadian Shield boreal forest type habitat. Further along, we have our West Coast exhibit. So these would be the rainforests on the west coast of Canada and British Columbia. And then we have our Arctic exhibit as well. So obviously the types of wildlife found in all of the habitats are different. They are all adapted to the specific environments that they live in, but all of the habitats provide 4 basic needs or 4 requirements that these animals need in order to survive. So all animal habitat has to provide food, water, shelter, and space for the wildlife that live there. So all 4 of those things need to be provided to the wildlife in order for them to survive and thrive in their environment. If one of those 4 things cannot be provided to the wildlife that lives there, it would be considered unsuitable habitat. So suitable habitat has to have the proper food, water, shelter, and then of course space for that animal to survive. Suitable habitat would have high biodiversity, so a high variety of living things in the environment. So lots of species of trees, mammals, birds, fish, wildlife, all working together to create a healthy ecosystem. So of course these are just wildlife dioramas, but I will be going outside to show you the difference between a habitat that is suitable for wildlife and unsuitable for wildlife. So I'm in an area here that has a high variety of tree species and plants and lots of different animals. I can see lots of wildlife sign in the area, so I know this is a suitable habitat. I'm right on the edge of a forest where a forest meets a field, so 2 kind of micro habitats side by side, which means that there's lots of area for wildlife to thrive. So this little bit of forest is unfortunately right in my backyard. So as you can see, there is not much growing here in the understory. It's primarily cedar trees around here, but there's no new growth because an invasive species called dog strangling vine has pretty much taken over this entire little patch of forest. So unfortunately, this is an unsuitable habitat for wildlife because there's really no food growing, there's not enough cover or just proper habitat structures for any wildlife. We do have lots of red squirrels that live here. So red squirrels like to make their nests in pine trees. So we do have some big pine trees here. There are some squirrel nests around, but that's really the only animals occupying this area here, except for my dog. Within habitats, there are abiotic and biotic components that work together to create a healthy ecosystem. So the biotic components are all of the living things, so all of your animals, all of your plants, but then the abiotic are the non-living factors that affect the things that live there. So things like the water, or temperature is an abiotic factor. The soil type will influence what type of plants are growing in the area. Precipitation and weather will also influence the habitats. So for this take-home activity, we want you to get out and explore the habitats in your area and identify 3 abiotic and 3 biotic components of your local habitats and determine what other components of the habitat those factors influence. So many wildlife species you aren't going to see up close. They're wary of humans, as they should be, but there are ways of knowing what's in your area without actually seeing the animal based on the sign or the indicators that they leave behind. So for example, I'm just in my yard this morning and there's lots of birds chirping, so being able to identify birds by their calls is a great skill to have, a great way to know what's in your area. But wildlife leave a lot of signs, so nests, scat, tracks in the snow or the mud. There's lots of indicators of what's in your area. There are many field guides out there that can help you identify the wildlife in your area, and they also make lots of apps for your phone as well. But if you're like me and maybe don't want to take all of your field guides out with you, what I like to do is just take pictures of what I'm finding and then researching later on when I get home what I have found. So there are lots of great resources available to you on the internet to help you identify what you found. So my dog and I went for a walk and I took lots of pictures of the different wildlife sign that we found. So I'm just going to show you those pictures and tell you how I identified what wildlife species left that behind. So right off the bat, here's an example of some wildlife sign that was left behind that I wasn't quite sure what scratched the tree like this. So at first I thought maybe it was a lazy porcupine because they like to feed on the barks of trees. Maybe just didn't feel like climbing. So I took a picture, I went home and I researched, and I found out that actually red squirrels will peel the bark off of trees like this to build their nests. As I was walking along the trail here, I noticed a lot of acorn tops, which seemed kind of weird to all be in one spot. But when I looked up, I could see that there was a squirrel nest, and all of those acorns would have been dropped from up there onto the trail. So this tree has obviously been very popular with the different woodpeckers in the area. So woodpeckers will create these little cavities, both to create shelter and to find food. And they also create habitat for other species. So there are some species like chickadees that are cavity nesters that don't create their own cavities. They rely on other wildlife like the woodpeckers to create these homes for them. I know that there is a pileated woodpecker in the area because they create these square-shaped holes in the trees. Versus another type of woodpecker called the yellow-bellied sapsucker that create all of these tiny holes in the bark where they can get to the sap in the trees. Many mammals can be identified by their scat or their droppings. So on my walk I saw lots and lots of white-tailed deer scat, as well as this one, which I believe to be a red fox. This time of year you'll find lots of bird nests being built, so bird species can be identified by their nest by looking at the shape, the size, and the materials used, whether it's in a tree or whether it's on the ground, and there are some great resources out there to help you identify what birds have built the nests. Unfortunately, I didn't see any animal tracks on my walks. The winter time would have been a better time to do that so I could see the tracks in the snow. But you can use charts found online as well as some field guides for identifying tracks. If you like birds, I highly recommend the Merlin Bird ID app. You can just enter the colors you see on the bird and the size, what it's doing, and it will create a list of possible birds based on the area that you're in. Identifying wildlife is lots of fun, and I encourage you to look into the resources available to you. And for your take-home activity, I encourage you to take a walk around your yard or your neighborhood and take pictures of the different wildlife sign that you have found and try and identify what species are in your area. Within an ecosystem, there are food chains and food webs. Both of these systems organize organisms based on a trophic level system. The basis of a food chain is a primary producer, or our plants. In our forest habitat, an eastern cottontail will feed on the plants. Energy is now transferred from the plants to the next trophic level. Animals that eat plants are called herbivores. or primary consumers, as they are the organisms that feed solely on the primary producers. Moving up the food chain, we have our secondary consumer, in this case a red fox that will feed on the eastern cottontail. Red fox are omnivores, which are animals that feed on both plants and other animals. Whereas our tertiary consumer, the gray wolf, is strictly a carnivore, which means that it only eats meat. The top and bottom of our food chain can now be connected back together through the way of decomposers. As we know, ecosystems do not consist solely of singular food chains. Instead, there are many food chains interacting with each other to form food webs. Here's our original food chain, and now we've added in an eastern chipmunk. Chipmunks, like the cottontail, are herbivores that will feed on the plants in the ecosystem. The fox will also eat the chipmunk. Our forest is also the home of a red-tailed hawk, who will feed both on the chipmunk and the cottontail. There are also white-tailed deer in this ecosystem, and their main predator is the gray wolf. As you can see, there are many food chains interacting in our ecosystem to form a broader food web. Unfortunately, there are many pollutants that enter wildlife habitat and make their way through the ecosystems and into the wildlife species living in that area. Say a pesticide was sprayed on the plants in a wildlife habitat. The primary consumer, the cottontail rabbit, would be ingesting those contaminants. Over time, these contaminants can build up in the tissues of the rabbit. This is called bioaccumulation. The concentration of the contaminant can also increase as it makes its way up the food chain. This is called biomagnification. So by the end, the wolf would have a higher concentration of the contaminant in its body than the rabbit did. Practice creating your own food chains and food webs using the attached worksheet. So you have been provided with a dichotomous key on how to identify different mammal skulls. So I do have a few skulls here. We'll work through a couple just so that you understand how the dichotomous key works, and you'll be able to do the activity on your own. So we're going to start with this skull here. So this is actually one that I found when I was out for a walk. So I already know what animal it is. There are few animals in the forest around here that would have a skull this big, but we are going to work through the key to figure out what it is, and then I will tell you what I know about this animal once we have identified it. So it is called a dichotomous key because each number gives you two choices. Does the skull have one characteristic or does it have another? And then it will send you to different areas within the key and it will narrow down your search. So starting with this skull here, question number 1 says presence of upper incisors. So incisors are all of the teeth between the canine teeth. So this skull here has teeth all along the front. This one has incisors. This skull has large incisors at the front, and then this skull also has incisors. So looking at our skull here, all I see are molars towards the back, so there are no incisors on this skull. So looking at question number 1, upper incisors present, go to slide 2. Upper incisors absent, go to slide 24. So we will now be going to slide 24. Now we are at slide 24, and basically our choices are a moose or something else. So it's asking about the nasal bone. So does it have a short nasal bone that doesn't extend to the most anterior cheek tooth? So anterior means towards the front, posterior would mean towards the back. Or does the nasal bone extend beyond the most anterior cheek tooth? So is the nasal bone in front of or behind the front tooth? So looking here at our skull, we can see that the nasal bone is ahead of the most anterior cheek tooth or the most anterior molar. So we will be going to slide 25. So we're at slide 25. It is either going to be a white-tailed deer or an elk. So what distinguishes one from the other is the presence or absence of an upper canine tooth. So a white-tailed deer does not have a canine tooth, but an elk actually has a rounded canine tooth at the front of their mouth. So this skull, because it was found in the woods, does actually not have that front portion of the skull, but I know that this is a white-tailed deer because there are not elk in my area. So we are going with the skull we found is a white-tailed deer. So there are a few things I know about this white-tailed deer. So first of all, I know that it is a herbivore. I can tell by the dentition or the teeth. So herbivores have flat teeth or flat molars, and those are used to grind down the plant materials that they eat. I also know that this is a fairly young deer. It is over 2.5 years old, but it is still pretty young. So deer, as they age, their molars grind down lower and lower because they do not regrow their teeth. Their teeth are not constantly growing. So over time, you can see that this is a young deer that has pretty sharp teeth still, but an older deer barely has any molars left. So this is still a fairly young deer. Its teeth are still ridged. And I know that it is over 2.5 years old because young deer do not get their back molars until they are at least 2.5. So this one has all of its teeth all the way to the back. So I know that it is at least 2.5 years old. I also know that this is a male deer or a buck because you can see the little nodes here where their antlers would attach. Does or the females would not have that. So this was a young male deer. So this is the next skull that we are going to identify. You may know right away what it is, but we'll still go through the key. So back to question number 1, presence of upper incisors. So there are clearly teeth right at the front. These are the incisors. So we will be going to slide 2. So it is now asking us, is there a diastema? So a diastema is a large gap between the incisors and the back teeth. So some skulls have it and some skulls just have teeth all throughout. So if I look at our skull from the side, I can see that there is a space between the incisors and the molars that is present. We will be going to slide 3. So now we either have a rodent or Legomorpha, which is a rabbit. So it is asking us, is there one incisor on each side of the upper jaw, or are there 2 incisors on each side of the upper jaw? So the way that this key works is it essentially divides the skull in half. Is there 1 incisor on each half, or are there 2? So in rabbits, there is a small peg-like incisor behind the front teeth. The rodents do not have that. So I'm going to look behind. I only see 1 incisor. There are not little pegs there. So we will now be going to slide 4. Presence of a postorbital process. So we're getting into some more technical terms now. Many field guides will have a glossary or some images to help you figure out what these words mean. This key is great because it clearly points out what it is looking for. So looking at the skull from the top or from a dorsal view, is there a pointed postorbital process? So orbital means eye, or is that missing? So looking at our skull from the top, there is no sharply pointed postorbital process, so we will be going to slide 6. So our option is either a muskrat or something else. So lots of skulls, especially when they're in the same family, so rodents, carnivores, etc., they can be distinguished by size. So Looking at our skull next to a ruler, it is over 130 millimeters, so it is not a muskrat. We need to go to slide 7. Now our only choices left are a beaver or a porcupine, so they share all of the same features until this point. It is now asking us if there is an auditory tube present, and it's pointing out in the picture what that means. So looking at our skull from the top, I can see that there is an auditory tube on each side. So those are the ear tubes. This is a beaver skull. If you would like to continue practicing using the dichotomous key to identify some other mammal skulls, there is an activity posted online with some pictures of skulls. This key is also provided to you for you to work through. But like I said, there are lots of keys out there for different types of wildlife, so birds, mammals, insects. So once you have the idea of how a dichotomous key works, it's pretty easy to navigate through them when you're identifying wildlife out there.